Hey everyone, it's Norm from Testin, and to wrap up this week, I'll be doing a product review as well as a tech deep dive into what's new and what's the latest and greatest in the world of modern consumer home theater projectors. This is the Xgimi Horizon Pro. It's a 4K DLP projector priced at around $1,700, and it represents kind of this latest class of consumer, prosumer projectors that you would consider when decking out your living room, your home theater space, or maybe even your office. It's about the same price point as what you'd be looking to spend if you're also maybe looking to get a high-end modern OLED television, which is what I've been running as my daily driver, my main TV for the past couple years. And I've been very happy with the image quality and brightness and HDR content that streams on an OLED television. And so I was really curious about what you could get for the same price point in the projector space. And I was both very pleased to see what's available out there right now, with also some obvious trade-offs that are worth considering that we'll be discussing. But first, let's talk about how this projector works. It's a DLP projector, which means it runs based on a Texas Instruments DMD chip on the inside. This DLP chip that's basically the same fundamental technology we saw in even DLP rear projection televisions over 10 years ago. One way to illustrate how a DLP chip works compared to, let's say, a LCD screen or an OLED screen is this children's toy I can bring into frame. I have children in the household. When you look at the DLP chip, what it actually is, it's an array of micro mirrors. So you think of this square right here representing what you would find on that small, maybe half-inch or third of an inch DLP chip. In there, depending on the resolution, a native resolution of that chip, you would find millions of these tiny mirrors that at very high refresh rates, many, many times a second, can actually articulate and actuate. And the way you get an image from that is typically you would shine a light onto that chip. So in this case, that light is an RGB LED. It's a lamp that bounces off this chip that then goes through a lens, the lens here in the front of the projector, and then gives you an image on your wall or projector screen. And what's amazing about these DLP chips is that the mirrors are not only super tiny, but they're calibrated and responsive enough that they can actually work at up to 240 times a second. They can actually switch on and off. The individual mirrors themselves don't have a color, and the color comes from the light source. So it's different than like an LCD-based projector where you would have an old school bulb that shines a light through like an tiny LCD screen, and that goes through a focusing lens that then gives you the image. Here, it's bouncing it off these mirrors, then through a lens and onto the wall. Now, the reason I'm explaining this is that the DLP chips inside this projector and most projectors you're going to find these days are still actually fundamentally natively 1080p, 1920 pixels by 1080 tall. Now this is a 4K projector because Texas Instruments has worked with projector manufacturers, developed a technology called XPR, pixel shifting. So in that optical stack, you have the light bounces off of these mirrors, and before it goes through the lens, it goes through another layer, a pixel shifting layer. And that's where the high refresh rate of these mirrors comes into play. As opposed to seeing a 240 hertz image, what you actually see is 1/4 of that. You see a 60 hertz image. And that's because at 4 times per frame, not per second, 4 times per frame at 60 frames a second, what actually each mirror is representing 4 different pixels. You think of a 4K image as having 4 times the number of pixels as a standard 1080p image. Each of these pixels here is actually representing 4 of those. And what the pixel shifting XPR layer does is it, again, at a sub-frame level, 4 times per frame, adjusts mechanically to shift the light so that the pixels aren't in the same place. That what you're getting is this overlapping of pixels in these quadrants that represents not 1 pixel, but 4 pixels worth of data. And when it's perfectly calibrated, and it actually works very seamlessly here, and it's a noticeable difference compared to a 1080p projector, you actually can not only process and receive 4K imagery on streams or through its HDMI input, but what you see at the end result from the light to the mirrors, through that XPR pixel shifting filter, and then through the lens is actually representative of a 4K image. So that's fundamentally how 4K DLP projectors today work when using that XPR pixel shifting plane. And so that's at the center of this optical stack. And so a manufacturer like Xgimi and the Horizon Pro here controls all the components along the ends of that stack. So from this high 2200 lumen LED, RGB LED backlight that shines through to the optics in the front to the processing. They're using a MediaTek chip that does all the video decoding as well as runs the Android TV 10 interface here. That's what they're controlling and packaging with the speakers in this unit. And that brightness of the LED light is really important. Here, rated for 2200 lumens, though in most of the preset modes, it's a fair bit under that, closer to 1500 lumens. And that gives you a sense of not only how bright the image can be, but also how far away the projector can be from the screen and how large that screen can be. It's a fixed focal length projector, and so there's no way to adjust the focal length here, which means that the throw ratio is locked at around 1.2. Fundamentally, in practice, that means that if you want a 100-inch image, if you have a 100-inch projector screen, as I have here at home, you have to set this a little bit further back than 100 inches from that screen. Here, basically somewhere between 105 and 110 inches away, or 8.5 feet back, depending on the angle that you're aiming this projector at the screen. And so that does lock in basically the optimal kind of a sweet spot for where you would want this relative to your screen, although you do have a little bit of flexibility because you could move off axis up to 40 degrees. Though I found that when you get past 30 degrees or so, you're going to get uneven image quality on the parts of the screen that are closer to the optics versus the parts that are further away that you do adjustment via the keystone adjustment. But at this, again, rated brightness, I found that there was a pretty good sweet spot right at around 100 inches. You could, of course, get really far further back and get a much bigger image. It's rated for, I think, up to 300 inches. And I tested this at about 150 inches right against a full wall. And while it is bright, it's not nearly as usable in daytime as you would have on a much smaller screen. And at 100 inches, it's still visible in the daytime with all the caveats of projectors in that the image is going to be a little bit washed out and you're going to get not pure black levels. Again, also dependent on the type of screen you're using that this light is bouncing against. So when comparing this, it's just pure brightness and size to an OLED television. Yes, you can get a much, much bigger image, but the brightness, the luminosity, and the visibility during the day is really going to be dependent on not only the room conditions, but how big of an image you want. I did find that about 100 inches is a pretty good sweet spot for this projector, and you can get a really nice projector screen from Silver Ticket products for about $250. And so all in, I would consider this about a $2,000 package. You don't need an external player because it has built-in streaming apps, but with a screen, which I do highly recommend for this, it's basically a $2,000 home theater product compared to an LCD or OLED television, which of course you don't need to buy additional screen. It is the screen. Now, in setting this up, of course, you want to mount the projector somewhere, and I was a little surprised that the mounting options on the Horizon Pro were very basic. There's basically one quarter 20 screw mount on the bottom of this. I have it connected to a tripod here, and you can mount this upside down and have the image automatically flip, but I was hoping if they're just going to use one point of attachment, that would be a 3/8 screw, just give me a little more peace of mind. I trust a quarter 20 here, but if I was mounting this, it's under 7 pounds upside down, I'd be afraid of over time that loosening up just a little bit. You have to also manually adjust the angle here, whether with your tripod or however you have this mounted, because there are no adjustable feet. So not like those projectors where you can stretch the feet out and tilt it up or down. You choose the angle based on like a ball head that you have this mounted on. And so you do have to get a projector stand, or I would recommend something like a small tripod that you can move this around. I guess portability is one of the selling points because it's fairly easy to move around between different rooms and set up. All you need is a power source, and you get all the data via the Wi-Fi connection, although there is an Ethernet port in the back of here as well. Part of that setup, of course, is going to be correcting the image for the angle that you're broadcasting against your screen. And so there is auto keystone adjustment where it can try to detect the borders of a screen and align the images, and it worked fairly well. But I still, for the precision and perfection I go for, I still manually switch over to keystone alignment every time I move the screen into a different room. But once it held there, you basically, as long as you don't move the projector or don't move the tripod, you don't have to do that keystone adjustment every time you boot up. You also don't have to do focus adjustment because that happens automatically as well. There's a camera in the front that takes a look at the image, and every time you power the projector on or every time you move it, it knows it's been moved, and so it does a bit of focus adjustment. And you can also manually activate that with a button on the remote as well. And I found it work really, really well. You can also calibrate it in the software if you want to do some micro adjustments. But for the most part, looking right at the image, I could tell that it was in focus without having to manually change it. So setup and versatility definitely works in this projector's favor, especially if you have a room where you might want to move it maybe for a bigger image occasionally, or a smaller image, or even maybe run it in the backyard at night against a screen. You're going to get a lot more potential use out of this for those movie nights than you would with a big 65-inch TV that you have mounted or locked in place. All right, let's talk about image quality. And for my tests, I chose basically the optimal conditions for the projector in a dark room against a nice projector screen. In daytime, like I said, it's not optimal. This projector, however bright it is not, I think, bright enough for a kind of daily use replacement for a television in a room where you have any kind of natural light coming into it. It really is for those low light evening time use, in my opinion. So in those optimal conditions, I want to talk about detail, color, and then brightness. Detail of this, like I said, absolutely better than that of a 1080p projector. Compared this to Xgimi's Elfin 1080p, also DLP projector, which is half as bright at 800 lumens, but there's a noticeable difference between the quality of a 1080p and a DLP 4K projector. You actually feel like you're getting all of those 4K resolution pixels. And color representation, also pretty good, although it does require a little bit of tuning. The menu interface where you can calibrate and adjust the image quality and image settings is actually surprisingly bare bones. There are a few presets where you can adjust for movies, office, performance mode, which was the brightest setting, but I found that these modes were a little bit inconsistent with the color representation. The performance mode, which maxed out the brightness, had a green tint to it, and the movie mode had a bluish tint to it. And so I always went to the custom mode, and that's where I could manually adjust the RGB values as well as the brightness, saturation, and contrast. And it's a case here where you don't just want to max out that brightness, which washes out the image. You do want to actually tune it for the screen that you have this projected against. And it's also where you enable HDR and turn off some motion smoothing. Good for sports, never you want to use it for TV shows or movies. There's also additional projector settings where you can change for different brightness levels, and I had this running in the brightest setting most of the time, and at that brightest setting, this consumes about 155 watts of power, which compared to an OLED television can be more for dark scenes. OLEDs range from sub 100 watts when you have a very dark scene, or near above 200 watts on a full brightness scenes, just because of the way OLED pixels work and how the individual individual pixels are illuminated. So color representation, good. Details, great. But the brightness of this is where I do feel like it does fall short of OLED televisions, both on the low end as well as the high end, the bright spots. On the dark side, because of the way DLP projectors work, you can't have true black. There can't be parts of the screen where it's localized, complete darkness and contrast. Even when you see your calibration and you see maybe your have this projected at an angle, you will see a shadow cast in the corners of the places where the projector is shining that light. So even in a pitch black room and using a good projector screen, you're not going to get true black levels on this projector, which is okay. It's rare to reach that what you can do with OLED on that technology. But on the high end as well, I found that even the brightest spots, even with HDR content, it wasn't giving me that telltale HDR glint in live action, the actor's eye, the kick light in the eye, or the rim light on the back of someone's hair. You can actually see that HDR is turned on and it's processing that metadata. But even at the rated 2200 lumens, the difference between the brightest parts of the image and the midtones and the dark spots, it's not wide enough that I felt like I was getting a full HDR experience in luminosity, even if it was giving me very good color representation. For a very dark movie, dark content like, for example, The Batman coming out on HBO Max, I would want to watch that on an OLED television even rather than a big screen, a big projector screen, projected image. But for content like animation, watching Turning Red or any other Pixar film, or plugging a gaming system onto this, or plugging even a Nintendo Switch on this, that content all look fantastic. So kind of rendered and animated content, amazing. Live action shot content that relies a little more heavily on that HDR metadata layer for the way the shot was lit did not fare as well here. Speaking of HDR imagery, this does support HDR10, but it doesn't support Dolby Vision. And I'm not sure if that's an Xgimi limitation, because looking at the MediaTek website for the manufacturer of the chip, Dolby Vision is listed as something this chip can decode. So I wonder if that's a licensing issue. Reaching out to Xgimi, they said that they are looking at ways to incorporate Dolby Vision for future products, which also tells me that it's not something that will get upgraded in this product. Dolby Vision, thankfully, isn't the only way to HDR, and most apps these days that do support HDR, whether it's Disney Plus or Apple TV Plus, they do automatically switch between what type of HDR metadata layer gets delivered. And a lot of that gets associated with the 4K content, and so because this can receive those 4K streams, you're also getting that extra HDR10 data most of the time. And with regard to those apps, this is running Android TV 10, so it has a lot of the benefits of that interface, including the Android TV ecosystem, app applications, as well as built-in Chromecast streaming right from your phone to the projector if you don't want to plug in a port or HDMI cable and plug it into the back of the projector itself. But there are also a few limitations. While most of the Android TV apps I tested, the most of the common ones from your Hulus to Plex to Prime Video, they all work just fine. Surprisingly, Netflix is still unsupported on Android TV for Xgimi projectors. It's a known issue. There are workarounds where you can sideload it through an intermediate app, but it's a hurdle. It's an extra step that most people won't know about unless you watch a video on YouTube or Google instruction on specific ways to do it. And Xgimi has said that they're trying to get certification for native Netflix playback, but they still haven't done it yet as of April 2022. The processing, the SoC here, that MediaTek chip, does run these apps fairly smoothly, so loading times are right in line with what you expect from like an Apple TV, but the interface itself, especially the menu system and even the volume control, I found to be a little sluggish. So it's definitely not as responsive as the native OS that you'd find on like an LG TV, or if you're using a game console as your actual streaming interface. But because that's the stuff that's built in, it's what I defaulted to the most. And things like scrubbing through or tracking through playback, I found a little more frustrating than on like an Apple TV, which of course you can just plug into here. You can plug your game consoles into here. You can plug a Roku onto here, Chromecast onto here. But the native apps, while convenient, I feel like could be speedier, and that again depends on what chip Xgimi is adopting, what SoC they've decided to use in their projectors. The other type of content that works really well in this projector is gaming, and gaming is one of those places where it's hard to go back after playing on a 100-inch screen, even to a 55 or 65-inch OLED with full HDR support. The vibrancy that you get from rendered content just looks fantastic on a projector like this. And there is a special low latency gaming mode that's enabled through HDMI 2.0 and the ports back here. So if you switch that mode on, plug in your Xbox, your PlayStation, or your Switch, I didn't notice any bit of latency. They rate it as 35 milliseconds, but you can basically assume it means it's good enough to play very fast-paced, quick response time games. The one place where gaming disappointed me is in the Steam Link app. That's again an Android TV app, and while it allowed me to stream video from my desktop gaming PC to the projector, the latency, the response time, maybe because of the processing that was happening through the Steam Link app at the same time, added enough latency that games were just unplayable, which was a little bit of a disappointment because I was looking at doing some wireless gaming from my computer to the big screen projector. There's also built-in sound, so there are 8-watt speakers left and right. They are Harman Kardon, and they sound actually really nice. Most of the time, I did not need to bump the speakers past 50%, and they are loud and booming. Now, it's not going to be your true surround sound because of where the speakers are placed relative to the imagery, so you're going to want to use HDMI ARC or even the optical out in the back to plug this into a full entertainment, surround sound entertainment system if you have this in a dedicated home theater space. But the built-in speakers are not only convenient, but I think more than sufficient if you're just wanting to set this up and watch a movie and you don't care so much about having, full surround sound 7.1 audio. The speakers also nicely mask the fan that's on the bottom of this projector, and the fan is pretty significant because the biggest source of heat for this is going to be that RGB LED, and it's a pretty big fan that is not, thankfully, very loud. I think unless you were sitting right next to this projector, it's not louder than a gaming laptop and certainly not louder than like an Xbox One running at full bore. It's noticeable, but not annoying, and especially when you have the sound running from the speakers, it's basically something I didn't notice after the first night of running with this projector. One interesting thing to note, though, is that because of the way DLP projectors work and because of the way specifically this pixel shifting, what people call faux K, works to upsample that DLP, that 1080p DLP chip into a 4K image, it wants to run at 60 hertz or 240 hertz more accurately all the time, which means that for 24p content, which most movies are at 24 frames per second, you may notice occasional just tearing of the image. And there is motion compensation that you can built in, so the 4K sports look really smooth, but for movies, and especially if you're very susceptible to just frame timings not matching with the refresh rate of the projector, that's something that can annoy you, especially if you're susceptible to like the rainbow effect that you might see with projectors. It's not something that bothered me, but it's something that you should be aware of when deciding between a DLP projector or a fixed TV. And at the end of the day, I think it's an incredible value proposition that as consumers, we have the choice between choosing from a incredible image quality of like an OLED television to something that can project well over 100 inches, that can support 4K, support HDR10 with really nice built-in autofocus and speakers and nice features of a projector like this. I think there is some overlap in terms of what they're best at, like video game content, animation, the resolving of 4K detail and color representation. But there are places where OLEDs still, I think, are superior in terms of just sheer brightness and visibility during the day, and places where the projector is going to win out in terms of the versatility of where you can have this set up in a dark room and sheer size of the image. And the fact that for under $2,000 you can get a projector like the Horizon Pro that can give you a compelling approximation of the theater experience, the theatrical experience of having the image fill your field of view, where you're not noticing the frame of the image that you would see even on the biggest of OLED televisions, is an amazing testament to how far we've come and what even Texas Instruments and manufacturers like Xgimi have done today. I do feel like we're maybe one product generation off for a projector really check all the boxes or things I'd want out of a home theater experience, like just the HDR brightness, Dolby Vision support, that Netflix app support for sure, a speeder, more responsive interface is what I'd like. But I think we're well on our way, and it's something that you should absolutely consider, even if you've never considered having a projector in your house before. We'll be doing more fun stuff with this projector in some of our production going forward, so please stay tuned for that. Let me know if you use a projector as your primary television. What's been your experience with that? And thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.